I think my title has remained the same, Temporal Disorientation, so a little bit different, but similar content. This is a work in progress, so feel free to say anything you like afterward. I'm invested in this, but I'm not that invested in this. I can't have my feelings hurt. Okay, so Djuna Barnes' Nightwood has agitated readers for nearly 80 years, and critics have noted this agitation equally as long. There are numerous reasons for this distress, reasons that range from the novel's sacrilegious satire to its sexual insinuations, but it has been its technical experimentation that has disoriented them. To many readers, this novel's characters run rampant about the pages of a lawless universe, the likes of which is both bewildering and unsettling. And yet there are laws hidden within the pages of this brilliant escapade, controlling the movements of individual bodies. There is a mass, a body, whose gravitational pull is so potent that it holds sway over the bodies in the novel, whose gravitational pull is so great, not even light can escape it. This is the dusky universe of Nightwood, and the massive body is none other than Robin Vogt, the invisible force dictating this law. Although many studies handle the subject of time and temporality in Nightwood, no critics have specifically discussed how varying temporal perspectives can be the disorienting factor for the characters in the novel that then radiates outward toward the reader. Critics tend to focus on revealing Barnes's modernist narrative technique, but do not venture further into what affect that technique finally has. By revisiting temporality in Nightwood through Einstein's theory of relativity, this paper will demonstrate the disorienting affect Einsteinian time can have when one still thinks in Newtonian time. In Joseph Frank's The Widening Gyre in 1963, he stated that, quote, Nightwood is spatial rather than temporal in structure, end quote. This may be true in one sense, in that the plot structure, if plot is what you want, seems to be read more effectively, spatially rather than chronologically, but that does not necessarily mean space trumps time in this novel. Notice that time and chronology in this statement are not synonymous, and of course, I assume those of you who do follow Nightwood know that there have been plenty of studies on temporality in Nightwood. This, in 1963, did not stop them from doing that. In her preface to the 2006 edition of Nightwood, Jeanette Winterson states, quote, this is not the solid 19th century world of narrative. It is the shifting, slipping, relative world of Einstein and the modernists, the twin assault of science and art on what we thought we were sure of, end quote. Winterson notes that Nightwood is an Einsteinian relative domain, but does not explore this kind of relativity any further. In his section on Nightwood in Libidinal Currents, Sexuality and the Shaping of Modernism, Joseph Allen Boone, using Sharon Spencer's space, time, and structure in the modern novel, reiterates her insight regarding Barnes's method of narration. Quote, Sharon Spencer comments on the way in which narrative time of the fourth section or chapter begins to slow down and to stand still until waking time ceases altogether as the narrative descends into the timeless Nightwood of subconscious and preconscious motivation in the next section. From this point onward, movement of words ultimately becomes the only significant action in the narrative. Plot has been brought to a virtual standstill, end quote. Boone builds on Spencer's thought, suggesting this moment is a breakdown of narrative temporality and a breaking open of narrative space through various narrative perspectives repeating the same event. But again, there is no analysis of the affect on specific characters of this time and space collapse and shattering. In her analysis of the novel, Nightwood and the Terror of Uncertain Signs, Teresa de Laurentiis also talks of Barnes's narrative technique regarding the temporal. She suggests the, quote, story is told with two contrary narrative strategies. One stretches out the time of narration by excruciatingly protracted monologues and detailed descriptions, while the other diminishes time so that the passage of months and time, at times years, can take up no more than 3 lines of the text, end quote. Like the previous article, although it is always helpful to have this insight into how Barnes disintegrates and ruptures temporal and spatial conventions of novelistic form, it does not quite offer comprehension into how disorienting this can be for those in and out of the novelistic world. So, what does it mean then to look at Nightwood through an Einsteinian lens? It means, like in most of modernist art and culture, we must pull up our anchors and let go stability. Einstein's theories disoriented science in ways that Nightwood continues to disorient readers. People expect one thing and get another. We expect the stableness of absolute time and instead get paradoxical and elastic perspectives that make us feel strange, peculiar. But this is the universe of Nightwood, a universe with new insight into how the constellations within that universe work. Before Einstein, the view of time in Newtonian mechanics asserted that it was an independent quality of an objective time, reality. This meant that there existed some clock, universal in nature, godlike even, that kept the absolute time of the universe. Quote, absolute, true, and mathematical time of itself and from its own nature flows equably without relation to anything external, end quote. So no matter where a person was, that clock remained the same, and the person, whether at the North Pole or in Leuven or on the moon, would experience time in the same way. As far as Newton was concerned, absolute time existed independently of any perceiver and progressed at a consistent pace throughout the universe. In this capacity, time then acted as a backdrop or stage setting within which physical phenomena occurred and was not dependent upon physical events. But Einstein, of course, asserted that time as well as space were not independent, but worked in tandem as space-time, affecting each other in various ways, and that all uniform motion is relative and there is no absolute or privileged state of rest. Of these things affected by Einstein's theory, the most important for the purposes of this paper is that there are no privileged reference frames. Simultaneity is not always simultaneous. And massive bodies cause gravitational time dilation. So, although Einstein's theory of relativity states that physical laws remain the same for every reference frame, moving in uniform motion, the perspectives from these frames will differ. Temporal experience, then, is one of the aspects of this theory that will differ. And these differences in perspectives for us lead to disorientation, for the novel's characters believe they can predict their own temporal experience, just as we believe we can predict the temporal mechanics of a novel, but all end up confused by these varying perspectives. These moments of cerebral disorientation can be described as transmissions of affect, as described by Teresa Brennan in her book of the same name. The atmosphere of cross perspectives in Nightwood literally gets into the reader-observer, which is why the novel is so disorienting. These moments of disorientation, or according to Sarah Ahmed, are what Merleau-Ponty attempts to get us through in his book, Phenomenology of Perception. It gives an account, it quote, gives an account of how bodies become reoriented, end quote. However, Ahmed wonders what would be the effect if we were to stay in such moments. Perhaps rather than disorientation, we might achieve a different orientation toward them. They might well be sources of vitality and giddiness, joy, excitement, or horror. A queer phenomenology would entail steeping oneself in the disorienting, corporeal experience rather than finding resolution. With Brennan's insight and Ahmed's assertion, this paper suggests Djuna Barnes has accomplished this state of persistent disorientation, and that this disorientation moves affectively into its characters and reader-observers. As noted by Felix, who was attempting to describe Robin at one point, and suggests she is more like an image than a person in his mind. Quote, an image is a stop the mind makes between uncertainties, end quote. Through her use of relative temporal paradoxes, Barnes uses this disorientation that brings uncertainty inside and outside the book. As noted earlier in the paper, other critics, of course, have noted the ways in which Barnes' narrative time does not particularly correspond to plot time. Sharon Spencer's quote above states that the movement of words at a particular point in the novel are the only movement and that the plot has stopped. Although Boone, mentioned earlier, ascribes this breaking down of time as a breaking open of space, I describe this as the incongruity of two different frames of reference, which disorients us. The narrative time of Nightwood indeed accelerates to a heady pace, but the plot time indeed does not. To observers, then, we see one aspect of the novel moving quickly and one barely moving at all, Words fly fast at us. Ideas, images, rhythms, sentences, paragraphs, pages, and yet nothing happens. The plot-driven novels of the 19th century demonstrate the tradition out of which we come, a preferred frame of reference in which plot is the measuring stick, and if nothing else, narrative time and plot time coincide. But now with Barnes, these become disconnected, and that Einsteinian notion of no preferred frame of reference does reign. To begin this argument, we want to speak with Robin. Robin Vogt is often described as the center of Nightwood. She's even described astronomically or cosmologically, as if somewhere within Robin is the key of Nightwood's cosmos. Indeed, this author argues that Robin is undeniably the center, the key of this novel's universe, but even further, the disorientation one feels while reading this novel stems from the fact that we have tapped into a temporal phenomenon, the repercussions of which play out in real time in front of our eyes. For Robin is a massive dying star, a supernova, whose core has collapsed under its own gravity, resulting in a colossal explosion. This explosion, what we indeed would call a luminously awesome performance of electromagnetic radiation, draws the characters in the book toward her. Little do they know, Nora, Jenny, and Felix, that the brilliancy of her light will turn into the darkest of night as Robin transforms from supernova to black hole. Robin's density generates strong gravity, which from a distance would be undetectable, but for those closest to her, circling round her, takes hold and draws their orbital paths closer and closer. Her density can be seen figuratively through her heaviness through the novel. She is first found by Matthew O'Connor and Felix Volkbein lying immobile and unconscious on her bed, underwater, subterranean. As noted by the Baron, quote, "There was in her movement a slight drag, as if the past were a web about her, as there is a web of time about a very old building," end quote. Nora also states at one point she always carries her cloak dragging, and there's plenty of other examples where this comes from. Robin's aimless daily wandering around the city is described with adjectives alluding to a kind of heaviness. Her corporeal posture suggests she is temporally sluggish and signifies her density. In general, Robin is expressed as closer to the earth, which can be explained through her mass. As Robin is a massive body herself, so the force of gravity between herself and the earth would be more intense. At one point, quote, "Kneeling in a chapel, Robin finds herself worrying about her height. Was she still growing?" End quote. Coincidentally, her gravity is apparent here also, but also her insatiable potential to expand. As much as we know about black holes, one of the constants is that black holes continue to grow without end by pulling infinitely other bodies into its own. And as we witness the bodies orbiting Robin throughout the novel, we also watch with anxiety, as anxiety radiates from the text, what might happen to these orbiting bodies. One can easily say that Robin's and Jenny's and the rest of the characters in the novel's frames of reference are different, which makes problems for them in myriad ways. Crucially, this is not something the characters in the book or the reader-observer consciously understands, but it is disorienting because they and we are not quite sure of what it is that we are witnessing. For example, throughout the novel, Robin's body language suggests she is temporally sluggish, again, working at a slower pace than other characters as a massive body. Jenny's forward movement toward Robin indicates the gravitational pull Robin has on this fast-paced star, whizzing in her orbit, but literally running back and forth around Robin. Quote, "At their subsequent engagements, Jenny was always early and Robin late. Jenny leaning far over the table, Robin far back, her legs thrust under her to balance the whole backward incline of the body. And Jenny so far forward that she had to catch her small legs in the back rung of the chair, ankle out and toe in, not to pitch forward on the table. Their frames of reference are obviously at odds, but the disorientation for us comes as the two lovers seem to be in different realms. These moments of togetherness, whether at the opera or at Jenny's home, are moments of questionable simultaneity. As noted in Special Relativity, simultaneity does not exist as a privileged perspective. It also, like so much else, depends on frames of reference. If one person believes she is doing something at the same time as someone else, this is true in her reference frame, but is not necessarily true in someone else's. The vast difference in reference frames between Robin and Jenny make one uncertain if they are psychically present simultaneously. Robin's body language and density make her seem as if she were light years away from Jenny. As Robin sits back away from the action, from Jenny, from taking part in present life, Jenny sits for no one. She is a squirrel racing a wheel day and night, this is a quote, and she is fluttering and febrile, rapacious, nervous, furious. We feel a distinct disorientation about how these lovers fit together and even begin to feel like their psychic distance denotes a physical distance, that their frames truly are different, which explains why the simultaneity of their love is not. As understood through general relativity, the closer one is to a massive body, the slower time ticks. This is called gravitational time dilation. Again, we see the discrepancy and disorientation between narrative time and plot time, especially in section 7, Go Down Matthew, the one before the final enigmatic, The Possessed, the final section. Nora's writing and monologue in this section is frantic. The reader-observer keeps a feverish pace with Nora's words, and yet, as noted earlier, the words are the only movement. The plot and Nora herself comes to a literal standstill. Because she is so close to Robin, she experiences time dilation. Her movement is slower than, say, Jenny's. While Jenny's orbit is far enough away that she can still dart about, Nora is approaching the point of no return. Throughout Nightwood, the reader-observer sees Nora inching closer toward the massive Robin's event horizon. We feel her terror as Nora, in her dreams, unwittingly plays to the metaphor of the event horizon. Even subconsciously understanding Robin's massive gravitational pull, she is, quote, transfixed by and fearful of the danger Robin poses, end quote. She sees Robin as, quote, enormous and polarized. All catastrophes run toward her, end quote. But just as we cannot really see black holes and can only know of them through their surrounding bodies, the reader-observer and the characters themselves only know Robin through her orbiting mass of wreckage. No one can quite explain Robin. As noted by Felix, quote, if I should try to put it into words, I mean how I did see her, it would be incomprehensible, for the simple reason that I find that I never did have a really clear idea of her at any time, end quote. Realizing that she is at the event horizon, the edge of the black hole, the edge of Robin, Nora laments wretchedly, quote, every hour is my last, and one can't live one's last hour, all one's life, end quote. Of course, in the theories of black holes, anything on the event horizon, the point of no return, or the point at which the gravitational pull becomes so great as to make escape impossible. From an observer's point of view, Nora will never quite pass the event horizon, but neither will Nora escape from it. From Nora's point of view, nothing changes. All remains the same. So tragically, indeed, Nora will live her last hour, all her life. In conclusion, the subject of Nightwood will always be in darkness in the night, after her dazzling display as supernova, that which perhaps attracted her bodies in the first place. Robin's successive transformation into black hole ensures she will never allow light to pass beyond her. Since Nora has crossed the event horizon, she will forever remain as if she were frozen to the reader-observer. This is how Barne ends the novel. There is no resolution of the action. Action has slowed to a moment, frozen infinitely, as are our emotions as readers-observers. Just as Nora leans suspended against the jamb of the chapel door and Robin lies weeping, the conclusion, like our introduction to Robin, whose legs are spread as in dance and whose shoes are too lively for the arrested step, when we meet her unconscious body at the beginning of the novel, the conclusion suggests an infinite movement too lethargic for the reader's naked eye. Nora passes the event horizon, but our perspective remains as reader-observers. We cannot detect the time warp that annihilates Nora, nor can we fathom Robin's endless existence. Like her usurpation of light, Robin will eternally pull more mass to her core, an eternal apocalyptic spectacle. More Jennies and Noras will orbit her space-time and be dragged toward her blackness. But Nora, she will always remain on the edge, the event horizon of Robin, never again emitting light, only and always remaining night. much.